Welcome back to the tutorial series on Piral. In this tutorial, we'll have a look at customizing the Piral layout. So what do I mean with Piral layout? Here we refer to the layout of a Piral instance. After all, a Piral instance is nothing more than just a standard React application. We put a little bit of sugar on top to make it actually quite simple to create an app shell. And we do that with just a single method called render instance. Now you can do that all explicitly, but in order to, let's say, minimize the efforts, and if you don't have any other customization needs, you just call render instance and that's it. Now we already supply here in our standard application shell that we received from scaffolding a layout object. Let's see what the layout object is. It's exported from the layout TSX, and it's actually an object containing keys with components. So here we have a key called error info, and here we have a key called dashboard container, and they all resolve to some React component. Now in this simple example they all sit in the same file, but obviously I could just create dedicated files for them, like here for instance. And I could just say import star is React from React, and then I may want to export const dashboard container. Now I missed its default tiles, which is something I defined up here, but yeah, let's just take them to our standard dashboard. We may also not need them, but they just illustrate that I can bring in whatever custom code I have. I don't need to have it all via the children. And if I want to have the right type, I can even say this dashboard container props, which is already coming from Piral. So can format this nicely. And now we even see what kind of options we have. So we could even get the history, location, etc. So this is because the dashboard container is a dedicated page, dashboard page, and therefore we could receive all these standard things. Nice. So what I can do, of course, is I could change any kind of structure. I could give this a custom class. I could also decide to not have the default tiles, for instance. That way we would only now see this without any. So let's first import it. Here we got it, and we see this is the screen where we only have now tiles coming from the pilots. It's all good. Is all what we wanted. I already mentioned that we could introduce custom classes. So we could, for instance, say, yeah, this paragraph, it should still be here, but maybe it should have my paragraph. And first of all, nothing changes because, yeah, this class is not given, but I can just edit the CSS. And I could just say maybe the font size is 3em and the color is red. Now I can add whatever custom style sheets I want. I can write whatever CSS or Sass in this case I want. It's all the standard thing. So the question is then, if all we have here are just React components, what's the catch? Now all these components are optional, which means there are many more components that I can add, but that I don't need to add. For instance, I could say, oh, I want to have model dialogues. Maybe it makes sense to define what the model's dialogue looks like, or how the model dialogues are hosted. I can do that here. I can also change the loading indicator. So right now, if we look in here, we see a loading indicator for a brief moment when we load our site. Let's introduce another site. Now we see loading, and after 5 seconds there is nothing. Right. Good. So what are we doing with our loading indicator? So simplest case. We could just have a different text. So far so good. Of course, nothing prevents us to actually use a different kind of loading indicator. Just use it, save it, and let's also use the HTML for it. Remember that in JSX it's class name. And then we see it already, but white on gray is maybe not so good. So let's have a different color here. Let's use as background blue. And let's do it again. And here we go. There are many more things we can change. In the end, one of the things that's quite important is many of these components have some properties. For instance, when we define how a tile is wrapped, we get the columns and rows of the tiles. But sometimes we may want to use some other components. So for instance, in our general layout, which is just called layout, we may want to have certain places where the notifications are gathered or where the menu is gathered. And in here we can just use components already coming from Piral. So here I use, for instance, notifications, which is imported from Piral. And the same, of course, applies to menu. Some of these take special props, like for instance, the menu has the type prop. If you want to see what kind of special components are there, just look at what is, let's say, offered from Piral. There are many things. For instance, there's already a pre-made dashboard that you may want to use. Otherwise, just check the documentation for the individual Piral plugins or Piral itself to see what kind of components are available. That's it for this tutorial. In the next one, we look at the development cycle of a Piral instance and the associated pilots.